I never thought the cruelest words would come from the mouth of my own son. Even less did I imagine those words would be spoken right in front of my employees, in the office building I'd built with my own hands over 40 years. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had taken certain precautions, and by the time they found out, it was far too late. It was a Tuesday morning when I heard the words that would change everything. I had walked into my own company, the business I founded back in 1985, when my son Marcus was just a little 5-year-old boy. I came in early, as I always had for 4 decades. The sun was just peeking through the windows of the 3-story building, which was once nothing more than a small 2-room workshop. I remember that moment like it was today. I was walking down the hall toward my office when I heard loud voices coming from the boardroom. One of those voices was Marcus's, the other was his wife Tiffany's. And what I heard froze the blood in my veins. Tiffany was telling him loudly, without caring who might hear her, that the timing was perfect, that I was old, that my time had passed, and the company needed young blood. She said I was behind the times, antiquated, and that my methods weren't useful in the modern world anymore. And then I heard it. I heard my son Marcus say those words I will never forget. "Your time is over, Dad. It's time for you to step aside." I stood there paralyzed in the hallway. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. The words echoed in my ears like an endless loop. "Your time is over. Your time is over. Your time is over." But the words weren't the worst part. The worst part was what came next. Tiffany kept talking, and her words were like knives. She said they should take advantage of me, still being mentally sound, to convince me to sign the papers to retire and to turn over total control of the company. She added that if I didn't do it the easy way, they would find a way to do it the hard way. And Marcus didn't say a thing to defend me. Not one single word. All I heard was his silence, a silence that hurt me more than any insult ever could. I backed away from that door without making a sound. My hands were shaking. I felt the floor shifting beneath my feet. I walked down to the ground floor restroom and locked myself inside for several minutes, trying to process what I had just heard. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. 72 years stared back at me. White hair, deep wrinkles around the eyes, hands that were once strong but now showed the spots of age. But my eyes were the same, the eyes of a man who had built something from nothing, the eyes of someone who didn't give up easily. I took a deep breath, once, twice, 3 times, and then something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage I felt, nor was it sadness. It was something much more powerful. It was clarity, absolute clarity about what I had to do. I left that restroom with my head held high. I walked toward my office, greeting employees as if nothing had happened. I sat at my desk, turned on my computer, and started working. But in my mind, the gears were already turning. I was already planning. Because you see, what Marcus and Tiffany didn't know was that I wasn't the foolish old man they thought I was. They believed that because I was 72, I no longer understood how things worked, that I was easy to manipulate, that they could push me aside without consequences. But they were dead wrong. That night, sitting in the living room of my empty house, I picked up the phone. I made a call that would change everything, a call Marcus never saw coming. And as I dialed those numbers, a small smile appeared on my face. Because if I had learned anything in 40 years of business, it was this: never underestimate the man who built the building you're now walking in. But before I tell you what I did, let me introduce myself properly. My name is Elijah Hawthorne. I'm 72 years old, and this is my story. For the last 40 years, I believed I had built a perfect family. I thought I had raised a good, honest, hard-working son. A son who would one day take the reins of the family business and carry it to new heights. A son I could trust. A son who would take care of me in my old age, just as I had taken care of him his whole life. How wrong I was. I was born in 1,953 inches, a small town in rural Georgia. My father was a carpenter. My mother was a seamstress. We didn't have much, but we had dignity, we had principles, and we had love. Those 3 things were my most valuable inheritance. When I turned 18, I came to Atlanta with an old suitcase, $300 in my pocket, and a dream that seemed impossible. I wanted to have my own business. I wanted to build something that would last, something I could leave to my children if I ever had any. The first few years were rough. I worked in a local plant during the day and took night classes in accounting at the community college. I slept 4 hours a night, ate bread and coffee most days, but I didn't complain. I knew every sacrifice brought me one step closer to my goal. When I was 25, I met Ruth Carter, the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, not just on the outside but on the inside. She had a heart of gold, a smile that lit up any room, and infinite patience with me and my crazy dreams. We got married 6 months later. We lived in a studio apartment, but we were happy. We had plans, we had hopes, and we had love. So much love. A year later, Marcus was born. I remember that day like it was yesterday. I held him in my arms for the first time, and I cried. I cried with happiness. I cried because I knew that child was my reason to keep going. I swore I would give him everything I never had, that he would never go hungry, that he would never lack anything. And I kept that promise. I did. When Marcus was 2 years old, I finally gathered enough money to open my own business, a small import and distribution company for construction materials. I started with 2 employees and an old truck. I worked 16 hours a day. Ruth would bring Marcus to the office because we couldn't afford daycare. The child grew up among boxes and invoices, but slowly the company grew. One client led to another. A good deal opened the door to a better one. In 5 years, we had 10 employees. In 10 years, we had 30. And by the time Marcus turned 15, we were the largest material distribution company in the region. I remember taking Marcus to the office on Saturdays. I would teach him how everything worked, explaining every aspect of the business. I wanted him to understand that none of this had been easy, that every dollar we had was earned with sweat and honest work. Ruth used to say I was too hard on the boy, that I pressured him too much. But I just wanted to prepare him. I wanted him to know the value of things, the value of work, the value of effort. Marcus was a good student, smart and dedicated. I paid for the best prep schools, the finest university. He went to Morehouse College, studied business administration, and graduated with honors. I was so proud of him, so proud. But everything changed when he met Tiffany. Tiffany came into our lives when Marcus was 26. She was a manager at a marketing firm. Beautiful, elegant, educated. At first, I liked her. She seemed ambitious, a hard worker. I thought she would be a good influence on Marcus. Ruth wasn't so convinced. My wife had a special instinct about people. One night, she told me there was something in Tiffany's eyes she didn't like, something cold, something calculating. But I didn't listen to her. I thought Ruth was being overprotective of our son. I wish I had listened to Ruth. Marcus and Tiffany got married a year later. It was a big, elegant wedding. I paid for everything, of course. I wanted my son to have the wedding he deserved, the one I couldn't give Ruth when we got married. Soon after the wedding, Marcus officially started working at the company. I gave him the role of general manager. I wanted him to learn from the inside, to understand every department, to know every employee. The first few years were good. Marcus worked hard. Tiffany also came to work in the marketing department. It seemed like everything was going well, that my dream of passing the company down to my son was coming true. But then Ruth got sick, pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors gave us 6 months. Ruth lasted nine months of suffering that tore my soul to pieces. 9 months in which my world fell apart. Ruth died 3 years ago, and when she left, she took a piece of me that will never come back. After her death, I immersed myself in work. It was the only thing keeping me sane. The company was the only thing I had left. That and Marcus, my son, the son Ruth and I had raised together. During those 3 years since Ruth died, I started noticing changes in Marcus. They were small at first, sarcastic comments about my business decisions, suggestions that I should take more vacations, that I should delegate more, that I should trust him more. And I tried. I tried to give him more responsibility. I tried to trust him because he was my son, because I thought he loved me, that we would always love each other, that family was sacred. But that morning, when I heard those words from the boardroom, I understood something that cut me to the bone. My son didn't love me. He only wanted what I had built. And Tiffany, his wife, was the snake whispering poison in his ear. That night, after leaving the office, I drove to the house where Ruth and I had lived for 40 years, the house where Marcus had grown up, the house full of memories. I sat in the living room on the armchair where Ruth used to sit and knit. The silence was deafening. The walls seemed to be closing in on me, and for the first time since Ruth died, I allowed myself to cry. I cried for my wife. I cried for the son I thought I had. I cried for the broken dreams and the lost hopes. But when the tears ran out, I dried my eyes, stood up from that armchair, walked to my study, and pulled out a folder I had saved for many years, a folder that contained documents Marcus and Tiffany had never seen, documents that would change everything. It was a Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks after that terrible morning in the office. I had decided not to act immediately. I had learned after 40 years in business that patience is more powerful than anger, that observing is wiser than reacting. So I watched, and I waited, and I listened. I had invited Marcus and Tiffany over for dinner, as we did every Sunday since Ruth died. It was a tradition I insisted on keeping. I needed that connection with my son, or at least with the illusion of the son he once was. I spent the whole morning cooking. I prepared the smothered pork chops and gravy that Ruth used to make, the one Marcus loved as a child. I set the table with the hand-stitched linen tablecloth my wife had made years ago. I put the family photos in their place, the same ones that had been there for decades. Photos of Marcus as a baby, from his high school graduation, from his wedding. Everything had to look normal. Everything had to be as it always was. The aroma of the stew filled the house when I heard the doorbell. It was exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Marcus had always been punctual. He inherited that from me. I opened the door with a smile. My son stood there with Tiffany by his side. Marcus was wearing a navy blue sweater and khaki pants. Tiffany wore a form-fitting white dress, high heels, and designer sunglasses that she didn't take off until she walked into the house. "Hey, Dad," Marcus said. His voice sounded casual, relaxed, as if he hadn't said those terrible words 3 weeks ago, as if nothing had happened. "Hello, son," I replied. I hugged them both. Marcus's hug was brief, almost mechanical. Tiffany's was even colder. I could feel the tension in her shoulders, the rigidity in her posture. They walked in and sat in the living room while I finished the final touches in the kitchen. I watched them from the doorway. Marcus was checking his phone. Tiffany was looking around the room with an expression I couldn't decipher: disdain, boredom, impatience. I noticed something that caught my attention. Tiffany was whispering something to Marcus. He shook his head. She insisted. He looked uncomfortable. "Dinner's ready," I announced. They sat at the table. I served the pork chops. I served the homemade bread. I served the wine Ruth and I used to share on Sundays. Everything exactly as my wife would have done it. "It looks delicious, Mr. Hawthorne," Tiffany said. Her tone was sweet but fake, like sugar over poison. "Thank you, Tiffany," I replied. "Ruth taught me this recipe right after we got married." "How sweet," she murmured. But there was no sweetness in her eyes, only that cold gleam Ruth had noticed years ago. We started eating in silence. The only sound was the clinking of cutlery against the plates. That silence told me more than any conversation could. There was something in the air, something dense, something about to explode. "Dad," Marcus began after several minutes. He put his fork down on the plate and wiped his mouth with his napkin. "Tiffany and we need to talk to you about something important." There it was, the moment I had been waiting for. "What is it, son?" I asked. My voice was calm. I took a sip of wine. I kept my face neutral. "It's about the company," Marcus continued. He looked at Tiffany. She gave him a small nod, as if giving him permission to proceed. That gesture told me everything I needed to know about who truly ran their relationship. "Tiffany and I have been talking," Marcus said. "We think it's time for you to consider retiring." I put my fork down on the plate slowly, deliberately. I looked at both of them. Marcus couldn't meet my gaze, but Tiffany could. She looked directly into my eyes without blinking. There was something defiant in her posture. "Retiring," I repeated the word, as if I'd never heard it before. "Yes, Dad," Marcus said. His voice was firmer now. "You're 72 years old. You've worked your whole life. You deserve to rest, travel, and enjoy your old age." Old age. That word hit me like a slap, but I showed no reaction on my face. "The company is in good hands," Marcus continued. I've been managing the day-to-day operations for the last 3 years. Tiffany has modernized the entire marketing department. The numbers are better than ever. You don't need to keep carrying that responsibility." "I see," I said. "And what exactly are you proposing?" Tiffany leaned forward. Now she was the one who spoke. Her voice was smooth but firm, professional as if she were giving a business presentation. "Mr. Hawthorne, you built something marvelous. No one can take that away from you. But the business world has changed. There are new technologies, new strategies, ways of operating that you may not be familiar with." Not familiar with. Another elegant way of saying, I'm old, that I'm obsolete. I said to Tiffany, my tone gentle, almost curious. She smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What we propose is an orderly transition. You would step down as Chief Executive Officer. Marcus would take that position. You would remain as Chairman of the Board, of course, an honorary position without the day-to-day responsibilities." An honorary position. The words floated in the air. I knew exactly what they meant, an empty title, without power, without a voice. A nice way of saying, we want you gone. "And my stake in the company?" I asked. Marcus intervened quickly. "That wouldn't change, Dad. You would remain the majority shareholder. All the money the company generates would still be yours. But not the decisions," I added. Silence. Marcus and Tiffany looked at each other. "Well," Marcus finally said, "the operational decisions would have to belong to the CEO. That's logical, isn't it?" "Logical. Yes, very logical. Stripping all power from the man who built the company from scratch. Very logical." I took another sip of wine. I watched them over the rim of my glass. Marcus looked nervous. Tiffany looked confident, sure of herself as if she had already won. "Have you spoken to the other partners about this?" I asked. I knew the answer, but I wanted to hear them say it. "Not yet," Marcus admitted. "We wanted to talk to you first. You're our father. Your opinion is the most important. Our father." He called me our father, not Dad, not Daddy, as he did when he was a child. Our father, formal, distant, as if I wasn't really his father anymore. Just an obstacle that needed to be removed. "I appreciate you coming to talk to me first," I said. My voice was calm, reasonable. "You can think about it, of course," Tiffany said. "But we hope you don't take too long to decide. There are some business opportunities that require quick decisions. Decisions that would be easier with a clear leadership structure. There was the threat, subtle, elegant, but a threat nonetheless. Decide fast, or we'll lose opportunities. Decide fast, or we'll hold you responsible for what goes wrong. I'll think it over this week," I promised. "I'll give you an answer by Friday." Marcus looked relieved. Tiffany looked satisfied. They both thought I had accepted my defeat, that I would surrender without a fight. They had no idea how wrong they were. We finished eating. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, the weather, the news, a trip Tiffany and Marcus were planning. But everything felt forced, artificial, as if we were acting in a play where everyone knew their lines but no one believed the script. As I poured coffee, I watched them with new eyes. I really watched them. I saw how Tiffany touched Marcus's arm every time he spoke, a touch of control, of ownership. I saw how Marcus sought her approval with his gaze before answering my questions. I saw the power dynamic between them, and I realized something that broke my heart. My son was no longer my son. He was a puppet, and Tiffany was pulling the strings. When they finally left around 5 that afternoon, I closed the door behind them and leaned against it. The silence of the empty house enveloped me like a heavy shroud. I walked back to the dining room. The plates were still on the table. The wine half finished in the glasses, the crumpled napkins next to the plates. Everything was a reminder of what had just happened. I sat in my chair, the same chair where I had sat thousands of times with Ruth beside me, where we had raised Marcus, where we had celebrated birthdays, Christmas, anniversaries, where we had built a family, or so I thought. I looked at the empty chair where Ruth used to sit. "If you were here," I said aloud to the empty air, "what would you tell me?" But Ruth wasn't there. Ruth would never be there again. And her son, the son she had loved with every fiber of her being, the son for whom she had sacrificed so much, that son now wanted to kick me out of my own company. I stood up, collected the plates, and washed them one by one. The hot water burned my hands, but I didn't care. I needed to feel something. I needed the physical pain to distract me from the emotional pain that was tearing at my chest. When I finished, I dried my hands, walked to my study, and sat at my desk, the same desk where I had worked for 30 years, where I had signed contracts, where I had made decisions that changed lives. I took out my phone. I looked up a number I hadn't dialed in years, the number for Walter Jones, my lawyer. But more than that, my friend, a man I trusted with my life. I dialed and waited. 3 rings. Elijah? Walter's voice sounded surprised. We hadn't spoken in months. Walter, I need to see you. It's urgent. What happened? His tone immediately changed, concerned, alert. I can't talk over the phone. Can you come to my house tomorrow morning? There was a pause. I'll be there at 9 a.m. Thank you, Walter. I hung up. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and for the first time in 3 weeks, I smiled. Because if Marcus and Tiffany wanted to play, we were going to play, but we were going to play by my rules. And they didn't even know what game we were playing. That night, as I lay in my bed in the darkness, I thought of something my father had told me when I was young. Elijah, he had said, life is going to hit you hard. It's going to knock you to the ground. But the measure of a man isn't how many times he falls. It's how many times he gets up. I had fallen. My own son had pushed me. But I was going to get up. And when I did, they would wish they had never underestimated me. Because what Marcus and Tiffany didn't know was that I wasn't just an old businessman. I was a betrayed father. And there is nothing more dangerous than a man who has nothing left to lose except his dignity. Monday morning, I arrived at the office as usual at 7 a.m., 30 minutes before any other employee. It had been my routine for 40 years. But this Monday was different. This Monday, I knew something Marcus and Tiffany didn't. Walter had come to my house the day before, just as he promised. We sat in my study for 3 hours. I told him everything, every word I had heard, every suspicious conversation, every look, every detail. And Walter, with his 30 years of experience as a corporate attorney, had given me the most important piece of advice of my life. Don't do anything yet, he had told me. Let them get comfortable. Let them think they've won. And in the meantime, we prepare. So that's what I did. I arrived at the office, greeted the employees, locked myself in my office, checked emails, signed documents, and acted as if everything was normal. But at 10 a.m., my secretary Brenda knocked on my door. Mr. Hawthorne, Marcus wants to see you in the boardroom. He says it's urgent. Thank you, Brenda. I stood up, adjusted my tie, and took a deep breath. It was time. When I walked into the boardroom, it wasn't just Marcus. Tiffany was there too, and there were 2 other men I immediately recognized. David Coleman, the chief financial officer, and Kyle Jenkins, the head of operations, 2 men I had hired, 2 men I had trusted. The 4 of them were sitting on the same side of the table, as if they were a united front, as if I were the enemy. That image told me everything. Good morning, I said. My voice was calm. I walked toward the chair that had always been mine, the chair at the head of the table. Dad, Marcus said. His voice sounded tense. I think it's better if you sit here. He pointed to a chair on the opposite side, a chair usually used by visitors, suppliers, and outsiders. I remained standing. I looked at all of them one by one. This is my company, I said. This is my chair. The silence that followed was heavy, dense. I could feel the tension in the air like electricity. Mr. Hawthorne, Tiffany intervened. Her voice was sweet but firm. I think if you sit here, we can talk more comfortably. It's just a chair, just a chair. But both of us knew it wasn't just a chair. It was a symbol of power, of control, of who really called the shots. For a moment, I considered fighting for that chair. I considered standing my ground. But then I remembered Walter's words. Let them get comfortable. I sat where Tiffany had pointed. Marcus cleared his throat. He looked at the others, then looked at me. Dad, we've called this meeting because we need to discuss the future of the company. We talked about that yesterday, I said. Yes, but we need an answer, and we need everyone on the same page. David leaned forward. He was a 50-year-old man with thick glasses and a receding hairline. I had hired him 15 years ago when no one else would give him a chance. Mr. Hawthorne, with all due respect, The numbers don't lie. The company has grown 30% in the last 3 years since Marcus took more control of operations. The market is changing quickly. We need agility, quick decisions. And your point is, David? My point is that perhaps it's time to consider a restructuring, one that allows the next generation to take the reins completely. The next generation, my son, the son I had heard days earlier planning my expulsion. Kyle Jenkins spoke next. He was younger, 45, ambitious. He had always been ambitious. Mr. Hawthorne, you're a legend in this industry. We all respect you deeply. But the digital world, new technologies, and international markets are territories that require a different mindset, a more contemporary vision. Contemporary. Another elegant way of saying I'm old, that I'm done. I listened to everyone in silence. I watched Marcus nod with every point they made. I watched Tiffany take notes on her iPad. I watched how they had all prepared their arguments, their justifications, their excuses. And then Tiffany spoke. Mr. Hawthorne, no one here is questioning your legacy. No one can deny everything you've built. But you have to understand that holding on to the past can hurt the future of this company, your company. There was something in the way she said your company with that slightly condescending tone, as if she were speaking to a child. Continue, Tiffany, I said. My face showed no emotion. She smiled. She thought she had me. We have prepared a formal proposal of the transition that benefits everyone. You would retire as CEO, maintain your position on the board, of course, and receive generous compensation for your years of service. Years of service as if I were an employee, as if I weren't the founder, the owner. Marcus slid a folder across the table, a navy blue folder with the company logo. Open it, Dad. Read it calmly. We've worked hard on this. I opened the folder slowly. My eyes scanned the document, legal terms, clauses, numbers, percentages. And then I saw something that chilled me to the bone. On page 5, in small print, there was a clause that basically said I would surrender total operational control of the company, that all strategic decisions would be made by the new CEO, and that my vote on the board would be merely consultative, non-binding, without real power. I kept reading. Page 6, another clause. This one about my shareholding. They proposed that I sell 20% of my shares to Marcus at a price they called fair, but which I knew was far below the real value. And then on page 7, the final clause. If I rejected this offer, they had the right to call an extraordinary shareholder meeting to vote on my removal as CEO for reasons of health and mental capacity. Mental capacity. I read those words 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. They were saying I was senile, that I had lost my mind, that I was incompetent. I closed the folder slowly, deliberately. I looked at all of them. Mental capacity. My voice was low, dangerously low. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Dad, that's just a legal formality, a standard clause in these types of agreements. A formality. You are questioning my mental capacity. Mr. Hawthorne, David said. His tone was apologetic. We're not really saying you have problems. It's just that at a certain age... At a certain age, what, David? At a certain age we become useless? At a certain age we stop being human? At a certain age our working lives mean nothing? My voice had risen. I couldn't control it. The rage I had been suppressing for weeks was finally starting to come out. Dad, calm down, Marcus said. Calm down? My own son is trying to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal my company, and you tell me to calm down? It's not stealing, Tiffany intervened. Her voice had lost all its previous sweetness. It was cold, calculating now. It's a generational transfer. It happens in all family businesses. It happens when the father agrees, I shouted, not when they conspire behind his back. No one is conspiring, Kyle said. We're trying to protect the company. Protect it from whom? From me? From the man who built it with his own hands? I was standing. I didn't remember getting up. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Marcus also stood up. Dad, look at yourself. You're out of control. This is exactly what we're talking about. You can't handle the pressure. You can't handle the stress. I can't handle the stress? I built this company from nothing. I survived 3 recessions. I competed against corporations 10 times bigger than us. And you tell me I can't handle the stress? That was years ago, Tiffany said. Things have changed. You have changed. I haven't changed. The only thing that has changed is that you've shown your true colors. Mr. Hawthorne, please, David said. Sit down. Let's discuss this like adults. Like adults, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. I sat down not because they asked me to, but because my legs suddenly felt weak, because the weight of what was happening finally hit me with its full force. My son was betraying me in my own office, in front of employees I had hired, using words like mental capacity and incompetence to justify his treason. And Marcus sat down too. He took a deep breath. Dad, we didn't want it to be like this. We wanted it to be an amicable transition. But if you don't want to cooperate, we'll have no choice but to take more drastic measures. Drastic? How drastic? We'll call that extraordinary meeting, Tiffany said. We'll present evidence that you're no longer fit to run the company, testimonies, documents, incidents. What incidents? She took out her iPad and started reading. Last month, you forgot an important meeting with a key client. 3 weeks ago, you signed a contract without reading all the clauses. Last Friday, you yelled at Brenda in the hallway over a mistake you yourself had made. I started to object, but I stopped because it was true. All of it was true. I had been so distracted after discovering their betrayal that I had made those mistakes. And they had been documenting every single one. See, Dad, Marcus said. His voice was softer now, almost compassionate, but I could see the falseness behind that pity. We don't want to embarrass you. We don't want to drag you into a public legal battle. We just want what is best for you, for the company, for everyone. What was best for me, taking everything I had worked for, calling me senile, destroying my reputation. That was what was best for me. I looked at my son, truly looked at him, and for a moment I searched for some trace of the boy he used to be. The boy who would hug me when I came home from work, who told me he wanted to be like me when he grew up, who had once called me his hero. But that boy was gone, if he had ever existed at all. In his place was a man who had learned the lessons I taught him well, but he had learned the wrong ones. He had learned about ambition, about power, about winning at any cost, but he hadn't learned about loyalty, about family, about honor. I need time, I finally said. My voice sounded hollow, empty. There isn't much time, Kyle said. We have a merger offer from an international company, but they need an answer in 2 weeks, and they need to know who's in charge. So that was the real reason. It wasn't just about power. It was about money, an offer that would likely make them all rich. All of them except me. Until Friday, I said. You'll give me until Friday. Marcus looked at Tiffany. She nodded. Until Friday, Marcus agreed. I stood up. I took the blue folder and walked out of that room without looking back. I walked down the hall to my office. Each step felt like I was walking through wet cement. Employees were watching me, some with curiosity, others with pity. They knew already. The word had gotten out that the old founder was being displaced. I entered my office, closed the door, and leaned against it. And then something inside me broke. I didn't cry. I had no tears left, but I felt as if my chest was tearing open, as if my heart were breaking into 1,000 pieces. I fell into my chair, the same chair where I had sat for decades, where I had made decisions that affected hundreds of lives, where I had built an empire. And now they wanted to take it from me. I looked around my office at the photos on the wall. Me, with Ruth the day we opened the business. Me cutting the ribbon at the inauguration of the new building. Me receiving awards, recognitions, medals. Everything was evidence of a life of work, sacrifice, and dedication. And for what? For my own son to declare me incompetent? To kick me out like garbage? I picked up my phone. I dialed Walter's number. I need to see you now, I said when he answered. What happened? They just showed their hand, and it's worse than we thought. I'm on my way. I hung up. I got up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city below the city where I had built my life, my company, my legacy. And I swore I wouldn't let them take everything from me without a fight. If Marcus and Tiffany wanted war, they were going to get war. But this time, I was going to fight with weapons they didn't know I had. Because what they didn't know, what they never knew, was that I hadn't built this company by being naive. I had built this company by being smart, cautious, and careful. And I had taken precautions. Precautions that were about to change everything. I smiled for the first time all day. It was a humorless, joyless smile, but it was a smile of determination. If they wanted to play dirty, they could. But I had written the book on how to play dirty in business, and they were only reading the introduction. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room of my house in the darkness, with only the moonlight coming through the window. The silence was so deep you could hear the tick-tock of the wall clock, the same clock Ruth had bought on our honeymoon. Every second sounded like a hammer striking my head. Tick-tock, tick-tock. I repeated the words from the meeting over and over in my mind, as if they were a movie I couldn't stop watching. Mental capacity, generational transition, no longer fit. Every word was a knife. Every phrase was a bleeding wound. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and poured a glass of water. My hands trembled so much I spilled half of it on the counter. I stared at the spilled water and thought, this is how I feel spilled, wasted, useless. I went back to the living room. I sat down again in that armchair, the armchair where Ruth used to sit and read. I ran my hand over the arm of the furniture. I could almost feel her presence. Ruth, I whispered into the darkness. What did I do wrong? But she wasn't there to answer me. She never would be again. I closed my eyes, and the memories started flooding in like an avalanche. I remembered the day Marcus was born, how I held him in my arms at the hospital, how I counted his tiny fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, perfect. How I swore I would always protect him, that I would give him everything I never had. I remembered his first day of school, how he cried, clinging to my leg. I don't want to go, Dad. I'm scared. And how I picked him up, hugged him, and told him everything would be okay, that I would always be there for him. I remembered when he learned to ride his bike, me running behind him, holding him, and then letting go, watching him pedal alone for the first time, his laughter, his joy. Dad, I did it. I did it. I remembered his college graduation with his black gown and cap, how he hugged me that day. Thank you, Dad, for everything, for believing in me, for giving me this opportunity. All those memories, all those moments, had they been real, or had it always been a lie? I wondered at what point I lost my son. Was it when he met Tiffany? Was it when he came to work at the company? Was it when Ruth died, and there was no one left to balance my toughness with her tenderness? Or was it always like this? Had he always seen the company as his birthright? Had he always seen me as an obstacle he would eventually have to remove? The tears began to fall. I couldn't stop them. I didn't want to stop them. I cried for the son I thought I had. I cried for the wasted years believing in an illusion. I cried for Ruth, who had died without knowing the truth about the son she loved so much. How lucky she was, I thought. How lucky she was to die believing we had a perfect family. The clock struck 3 a.m., then 4, then 5, and slowly, as the sun began to rise on the horizon, something inside me began to change. The pain was still there. The betrayal still hurt. But beneath that pain, something else began to grow. Not rage. No, it wasn't just rage. It was something deeper, something purer. It was indignation. How dare they? How dare they treat me like this? I who had given everything. I who had sacrificed everything. I who had built something from nothing to give them a future. I stood up, walked to the hallway mirror, and looked at myself. 72 years stared back. White hair, deep wrinkles, tired eyes. But there was something else in those eyes. Something I hadn't seen in a long time. Fire. You think I'm finished? I asked my reflection. You think you can just discard me? My reflection didn't answer, but I knew the answer. No, I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. I went to my room, showered, shaved, and put on my best suit, the gray suit Ruth had given me for our last anniversary. I tied my tie with steady hands. When I walked downstairs, I was no longer the broken man of the night before. I was the man who had built an empire, the man who had fought and won 1,000 battles. And this battle, this war, would be no exception. Walter arrived at 7 a.m., just as we had agreed. I let him in. I poured him coffee. We sat in my study. Tell me everything, he said. And I told him every detail of the meeting. Every word, every clause of the document, every veiled threat. When I finished, Walter leaned back in his chair. He whistled softly. Son of a, he mumbled. Sorry, Elijah, but your son is a son of a. I wasn't offended because he was right. What can I do? I asked. My voice was calm, controlled now. Walter leaned forward. His eyes sparkled with the sharp intelligence that had made him one of the best corporate attorneys in the state. First, I need to ask you something important. What percentage of the company do you currently own? 70%, I replied. And Marcus, 20%. I gave it to him when he turned 30. And the other 10% is divided among 3 minority partners. David has 5%, Kyle has 3%, and George Thompson, who's retired, has 2%. Walter nodded, taking notes on his pad. Has any of those minority partners been disloyal to you? David and Kyle were clearly in that meeting, backing Marcus. And George has been living in South Florida for 2 years. He's not involved in the day-to-day anymore. Perfect. Then, with your 70%, you maintain absolute control. They can't kick you out without your consent, but they can call that extraordinary meeting. They can present evidence of mental incompetence. Walter smiled a smile of strategy, not humor. They can try, but they won't win. Because to legally declare you incompetent, they would need a formal psychiatric evaluation. They would need medical proof. They can't just say, you forgot a meeting or made a mistake. But they documented those mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes, Elijah. That's not evidence of incompetence. It's evidence of being human. So, what do you suggest? Walter opened his briefcase and pulled out several documents. I suggest we act first, that we don't wait for them to make their move, that we seize control of the narrative. How? We freeze all corporate accounts that require your signature. We review every contract Marcus has signed in the last 6 months. We look for irregularities. And believe me, if he's been planning this, there will be irregularities. I leaned forward, interested. Continue. We also need to protect your personal assets, your house, your investments, your savings. Everything must be legally shielded so they can't touch it under any circumstance. It's already protected, I said. Years ago, I set up a trust. Walter looked impressed. Smart. Did Ruth know about this? It was her idea, I admitted. After we had a scare with a dishonest partner 20 years ago, she insisted I protect everything. Your wife was a wise woman. She was, I said, and my voice cracked a little. She was. Walter gave me a moment. He drank his coffee. He waited for me to compose myself. Is there anything else I need to know? He asked finally. There is. I went to my safe. I opened it. I took out a folder I had kept hidden for years. I handed it to Walter. He opened it. He began to read. His eyes grew wider and wider with each page. Elijah, is this what I think it is? Yes. Does Marcus know about this? No. No one knows except you now. Walter closed the folder. He looked at me with a mixture of astonishment and respect. This changes everything. I know. With this, you can not only defend yourself, you can counterattack. You can. I can take everything from him. I finished the sentence for him. Silence. Are you prepared for that? Walter asked. He is your son, Elijah. He may have betrayed you, but he's still your son. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked outside. The sun was shining. It was a beautiful day, the kind of day Ruth and I used to walk in the park. I remember something my father told me once. I began, my voice soft but firm. He told me, Elijah, you'll meet many people in life. Some will help you, others will betray you. But the true measure of a man is how he responds when he's betrayed. Does he give up, or does he rise up stronger? I turned to look at Walter. I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to let them take everything I built. And I'm not going to let them use my age as an excuse to call me incompetent. So what do you want us to do? Walter opened his briefcase, taking quick notes. I want us to prepare a counteroffensive, I said. I want us to review every move Marcus has made in the last 3 years. I want us to find every mistake, every misstep, every questionable decision, and I want us to prepare documents to restructure the company, a restructuring that protects my position, that makes it clear who's in charge, that sends a message. What kind of message? That they can try to tear me down, but it's not going to be easy, and they're going to lose a lot in the process. Walter closed his pad, stood up, and extended his hand. "You're going to win this, Elijah. I promise you." I shook his hand, strong, firm. "It's not just about winning, Walter. It's about teaching my son a lesson I should have taught him a long time ago." "What lesson?" "That respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And once you lose it, you might never get it back." Walter left an hour later with copies of all the documents, with clear instructions, with a mission. I stayed alone in my study, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone. I felt focused, determined, alive. I looked at the photo of Ruth on my desk, a 30-year-old photo, her smiling, young, beautiful, full of life. "I'm going to fight, Ruth," I said to the photo. "I'm going to fight for what we built together, and I'm going to win." The wind made the curtains move for a moment. I almost swore I felt her presence, her approval. I knew it was impossible. I knew it was just my imagination. But I didn't care because I needed to believe she was there, watching over me, giving me the strength to do what was coming. I picked up my phone. I dialed a number. "Brenda, it's Elijah. I need you to call an emergency meeting of the board of directors for tomorrow, 9 a.m., and make sure George Thompson is connected by video from South Florida." "But sir, tomorrow is Wednesday." "You said Friday." "I know what I said. Change of plans. I need everyone there. No exceptions." "Yes, sir." I hung up. I smiled. Marcus had said he would give me until Friday to decide. But I had decided, and I wasn't going to wait. If they wanted war, they were going to get war. But this time, I was going to launch the first strike. And when it was over, they would wish they had never doubted the old man they thought they could discard so easily. Because they were about to learn something important. Age brings experience, and experience brings wisdom. And wisdom, when used correctly, is the most powerful weapon of all. Wednesday morning, I arrived at the office at 6 a.m., 3 hours before the meeting I had called. I needed time to prepare, time to review every detail of what I was about to do. Walter was already there, waiting for me in the parking lot. He had worked all night. I could see it in his red eyes, his unshaven beard, his loose tie. "Did you find anything?" I asked as we walked toward the building. He smiled a tired but victorious smile. "I found much more than something, Elijah. I found a treasure trove of irregularities." We went up to my office. Walter spread documents across my desk, piles of papers, contracts, financial statements, printed emails. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a contract. 6 months ago, Marcus assigned an agreement with a consulting firm, $500,000 for strategic advisory services. The consulting firm belongs to a cousin of Tiffany's, and there's no evidence they delivered any real service, no reports, no presentations, nothing. I felt something ignite in my chest. "Continue. Here's more," Walter said, pulling out another document. 3 contracts with new suppliers, all signed by Marcus in the last 4 months, all of them with significantly higher prices than our usual vendors, bribes possibly, or under-the-table commissions. We'd need a full audit to confirm, but the patterns are there. "How much money are we talking about?" Walter did some quick calculations on his calculator. Conservatively, among all these questionable contracts, we're talking about $2 million over the last year. $2 million that had left the company, my company, while my son was planning to declare me mentally incompetent. The irony was almost comical. "There's more," Walter said. His voice became more serious. "I found emails between Marcus and Tiffany. They kept them on a private server, but I have my contacts." "What do they say?" Walter pulled out several sheets and began to read. "This one is from 2 months ago. Tiffany writes to Marcus. I already spoke with the lawyer. He says the best strategy is to document every mistake your father makes. Build a case of gradual incompetence. It will be easier than a direct confrontation." My blood was boiling. "Continue." "This one is from 3 weeks ago, right after you overheard that conversation. Marcus writes to Tiffany. I think he suspects. We need to accelerate the plan." Another email a week later. "David and Kyle are with us. I promised them significant bonuses once we take full control." Bonuses, he had promised them. Bonuses with my money. With my company's money. There's one final one. This is from 5 days ago. Tiffany writes, "If he rejects the offer Friday, We activate Plan B extraordinary meeting. Employee testimonies about his erratic behavior. Forced psychiatric evaluation if necessary. Forced psychiatric evaluation. They wanted to lock me up, declare me insane, take away not only my company but my freedom. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath once, twice, 3 times. When I opened them, I no longer felt the pain, only a cold, absolute clarity. Perfect, I said. Walter looked at me, surprised. Perfect? Yes, because now I can not only defend myself, I can destroy them. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing everything, every document, every email, every piece of evidence. Walter had made certified copies of everything. He had contacted a forensic accountant. He had prepared a complete presentation. By 8 a.m., employees began to arrive. I greeted each one as I always did. Good morning, Brenda. How are you, Jorge? Good day, Lucia. I acted as if it were a normal day, as if nothing extraordinary was about to happen. But inside, my heart was beating like a war drum. At 9:05 a.m., I walked into the boardroom. Walter was already there, setting up his laptop and the projector. Brenda had prepared coffee and water for everyone. Marcus arrived exactly at 9. He had an expression of surprise and annoyance. Dad, what does this mean? You said I had until Friday to decide. I changed my mind, I said simply. I have the right to call meetings when I deem it necessary. Tiffany arrived 2 minutes later. She wore a red suit, high heels, and perfect makeup, as if it were a celebration. Perhaps she thought it was. David and Kyle arrived together. They sat on the same side as Marcus and Tiffany. The division was clear them against me. At 9 a.m., the screen on the wall turned on. It was George Thompson, connected from his condo in South Florida. He was 75 years old. He had been my partner from the beginning, a man of honor. Good morning, Elijah, he said from the screen. His voice sounded worried. What's going on? Your secretary said it was urgent. Good morning, George. Thank you for connecting. What I'm going to share today affects the future of our company. I sat in my usual spot. This time, no one dared to suggest I sit elsewhere. Very well, I began. I have called you together because I have made a decision about the future of the company. Marcus leaned forward. His eyes shone with anticipation. He thought I was going to announce my retirement, that I had accepted defeat. Poor fool. But before I announce that decision, I continued, there are some issues we need to discuss, issues that have come to my attention in the last few days. Marcus's expression changed from anticipation to caution. What issues? He asked. I nodded to Walter. He pressed a button on his computer. The first slide appeared on the screen. It was the contract with Tiffany's cousin's consulting firm. Can anyone explain this contract to me? I asked. My voice was calm, almost casual. Marcus looked at the screen. His face paled slightly. It's a standard consulting contract. $500,000 for services that were never delivered. They were delivered, Tiffany quickly said, just not in written format. They were verbal advisory sessions. Verbal advisory sessions for $500,000. I repeated, how interesting. Walter switched to the next slide. The 3 overpriced contracts. And these? I asked. 3 new suppliers, all charging between 30 and 40% more than our established vendors. Can anyone explain why we switched to more expensive suppliers? Better quality, Marcus said. His voice sounded less sure now. Better quality, you say, Marcus? Walter showed the next slide, a comparative analysis. The products from the new suppliers versus the old ones identical. In some cases, the new ones were of worse quality. David shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Kyle stared at the table. I don't understand where you're going with this, Dad, Marcus said. There was a note of desperation in his voice. No? Let me be clearer then. Walter switched to the next slide. It was a projection of the emails. All color completely drained from Marcus's face. These are emails between you and Tiffany, I said. Emails where you discuss how to document my mistakes, how to build a case for incompetence, how to bribe employees to testify against me. That's private, Tiffany stammered. You have no right. I have every right when it comes to corporate fraud and conspiracy, I interrupted her. My voice was like ice. And believe me, Tiffany, I have much more. What is going on here? George Thompson's voice came from the screen. He sounded shocked. What's going on, George, is that my son and his wife have been stealing from the company. They've been manipulating contracts. They've been planning to declare me incompetent to take full control. And they've been doing it for at least a year. That's not true, Marcus shouted, jumping to his feet. You're misinterpreting everything. Misinterpreting? Walter showed the financial summary the next slide, a detailed analysis, and a $2 million figure in suspicious expenses. Inflated contracts, phantom services, unauthorized commissions. My God, George murmured from the screen. David and Kyle said nothing. Their heads were bowed. They knew they were implicated. Dad, Marcus tried. His voice sounded pleading now. Let me explain. Don't call me Dad anymore, I said. My voice was cold, colder than it had ever been. A father doesn't do this to his son, and a son doesn't do this to his father. There was absolute silence in the room. George, I continued, looking toward the screen, as a minority shareholder and a founding member of this company, I need your vote for what I am about to propose. You have my vote, Elijah, George said, without hesitation. Whatever it is, I propose the immediate removal of Marcus Hawthorne as general manager. I propose a full audit of all operations under his supervision. And I propose that any employee who participated in this conspiracy be immediately dismissed. You can't do this, Tiffany said. Her voice was no longer sweet. It was venomous. This company needs Marcus. This company survived 40 years without Marcus, I replied. It will survive without him now. I'm your son, Marcus said. Tears were starting to form in his eyes. How can you do this to me? I stood up. I walked toward him. I looked him directly in the eyes. I gave you everything, I said. I gave you an education, opportunities, a position in this company you didn't earn. I gave you my trust, my love, my legacy. I paused. And you repaid me with betrayal, with lies, by trying to steal my company, by trying to declare me incompetent, by trying to take away my dignity. My voice cracked on the last word, but I continued. So don't ask me how I can do this to you. Ask yourself how you could do this to me. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no words. There were no words he could say. Walter pulled out several documents. These are the papers for your removal, he said. Effective immediately. You have 1 hour to clean out your office and leave the building. You will be escorted off the property. And these, I continued, pulling out another folder. These are documents you should probably see before you go. I handed the folder to Marcus. He opened it with trembling hands, began to read, and then his face transformed from shock to absolute horror. This can't be real, he whispered. It's very real, I said. You see, what you never knew is that 20 years ago, when the company really started to grow, your mother convinced me to do something smart, restructure the ownership. What do you mean? Tiffany asked, snatching the folder from Marcus. I mean that the 70% you thought I owned is actually 70% of a holding company that owns 100% of the operating company. And that holding company has certain special clauses. What clauses? Tiffany's voice was barely a whisper. I smiled. There was no joy in that smile, only justice. Clauses that state that any shareholder who attempts a corporate coup, who commits fraud, or who conspires against the company's interests automatically forfeits all their shares without compensation, without appeal. The silence was deafening. That means, I continued, that the 20% I gave you, Marcus, no longer belongs to you. It has reverted to the company. You own nothing. Marcus slumped back into his chair. Tiffany stood motionless, like a statue. And you, Tiffany, I said, turning to her. You were never an official employee. You worked as a consultant, so you have no rights, no compensation, nothing. We're going to sue you, she said. Her voice trembled with rage. Try it, I replied. I have every email, every document, every piece of evidence of your conspiracy. Do you really want this to be public? She didn't answer. I didn't think so. I turned to David and Kyle. You two have a choice. You resign today and leave quietly, or I fire you and you face criminal charges for complicity in corporate fraud. I resign, David said immediately. Me too, Kyle murmured. Good. You have until noon to vacate your offices. I sat down again. I took a sip of water. My hand was perfectly steady. Marcus stood up, walked toward the door, and stopped. He turned to look at me. "Someday," his voice broke, "you're going to regret this." I looked at him, my son, the boy who was once my pride. "I already regret it," I replied. "I regret not having seen who you truly were, for not having protected what your mother and I built, for having been so blind." He opened his mouth to reply, but nothing came out. He walked out of the room. Tiffany followed him, and that was the last time I saw my son. 8 months have passed since that day, 8 months since my son walked out of that boardroom and out of my life. I won't lie to you. The first few months were the hardest of my life, worse even than when I lost Ruth. Because when Ruth died, she died with love in her heart. She died without knowing that the son we loved so much was capable of betrayal. But I live with that knowledge every day. There were nights when I woke up at 3 a.m., sweating, wondering if I had done the right thing, if I had been too hard, if I should have given him another chance. But then I would remember the emails, the words forced psychiatric evaluation, incompetent, no longer fit, and I knew I had done the right thing. The company survived more than survived. It prospered. I hired a new general manager, a 50-year-old man who was honest, hard-working, and had no family ties to complicate things. Someone who earned his position on merit, not by blood. I implemented new controls, new audits, new oversight systems. Never again could someone do what Marcus did without me knowing. George returned from South Florida not to work full-time, but as an advisor. His wisdom, his experience, was invaluable. The employees, most of them, stayed during the months of reconstruction. Some were shocked by what had happened. Others said they had always suspected something wasn't right. But all of them respected my decision. Brenda, my secretary, told me something one afternoon. "Mr. Hawthorne, what you did was brave. Many men would have looked the other way. They would have let paternal love cloud their judgment. But you chose truth over comfort. That is admirable." Her words gave me solace, a little peace. But they didn't erase the pain. One day, 3 months after everything, I received a letter. It came from a lawyer I didn't know. I opened it with trembling hands. It was from Marcus. It said he and Tiffany had moved to another city, that they had started over, that they were trying to rebuild their lives. The letter wasn't an apology, not exactly. It was more of an explanation. It said they had been ambitious, that they had made mistakes, that things had gotten out of control. But he never said, "I'm sorry." He never acknowledged the true weight of what he had done, of what he had tried to do. I put that letter in a drawer. I didn't reply. What could I say? That I forgave him? I couldn't, not yet, maybe never. That I understood? Not that either, because I didn't understand how a son could do that to his father. So I said nothing, and silence became my answer. But life, as it always does, went on. I celebrated my 73rd birthday a month ago. It was a small celebration, just a few close friends. George came from South Florida specifically for it. Walter, of course, was there. And Brenda organized a small party in the office. As I cut the cake, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, I realized something important. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes family is the people who choose to stay, the people who support you when everything falls apart, the people who tell you the truth when you need to hear it most. Those people, the ones who were there that day, they were my real family. I visit Ruth's grave every Sunday. I bring her fresh flowers, white lilies, her favorite. I sit on the bench near her gravestone and tell her about the week, about the company, about life. And I ask for forgiveness. Forgiveness because perhaps I was too hard on Marcus when he was a boy. Perhaps I expected too much of him. Perhaps I pressured him so much that I ended up pushing him toward the person he became. Or perhaps not. Perhaps some people simply choose the wrong path, no matter how much love they receive. I don't have the answers, and I have learned to live with that uncertainty. 2 weeks ago, something unexpected happened. I was in my office reviewing some reports when Brenda walked in with a strange expression. "Mr. Hawthorne, there's someone here who wants to see you." "Who is it?" "His daughter." I froze. "My daughter? I don't have a daughter." Brenda handed me a business card, a name I didn't recognize, a profession. A lawyer. She says she's the daughter of a friend of yours from many years ago, that he recently passed away, and asked her to come see you. Confused, I told her to let her in. A woman in her mid-30s walked in, dark hair, intelligent eyes. She carried a leather briefcase. "Mr. Elijah Hawthorne," she said, extending her hand. "My name is Alexis Shaw. I'm Bernard Shaw's daughter." Bernard Shaw. The name hit me like a train. Bernard had been my partner in the early years of the company. He and I had started together, but he had retired after 10 years to pursue other dreams. We had lost touch decades ago. "Bernard," I repeated. "How is he?" She lowered her gaze. "He passed away 3 months ago, cancer." "I'm so sorry." "Thank you. Before he died, he gave me this. He asked me to give it to you personally." She handed me a heavy envelope sealed with wax. I opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter in the shaky hand of a sick man. I read it in silence, and as I read, tears began to fall. Bernard wrote about the old days, about when we built the company with nothing but dreams and hard work, about the nights we stayed up until dawn, planning the future. And then he wrote about something I never knew. He wrote that he had sold his shares because he had made a mistake, a financial error that could have destroyed the company. But I never knew because he fixed it in silence, sold his share, and left before the damage was irreparable. "For 30 years," Bernard wrote, "I've carried the guilt of having abandoned you, of not having been strong enough to stay and fight with you. But I did what I thought was right at the time." And then in the last lines, "Elijah, my friend, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But before I leave, I need to tell you something. I heard what happened with your son. The news reached me, and I want you to know you did the right thing. Loyalty is important, but the truth is more important. And dignity, my friend, dignity is priceless." I folded the letter and wiped my eyes. Alexis looked at me with compassion. "My father admired you greatly," she said softly. "He always talked about you. He said you were the most principled man he had ever known." "I don't feel very principled lately." She smiled a sad but warm smile. "Integrity isn't about feeling good about your decisions. It's about making the right decisions even when they tear you apart inside." She was right, and her words, her father's words, from the grave, gave me something I had been searching for months. Absolution. Not from Marcus. I would never have that from him, but from myself. Forgiveness from myself for having done what was necessary, even though it would hurt. Alexis left that afternoon, but she left me with more than a letter. She left me with a reminder that the difficult decisions are often the right ones. Now, as I sit here in my office looking out the window at the city I've called home for 73 years, I think about everything I've learned. I've learned that family is not always forever, that blood does not guarantee loyalty, that sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who can hurt you the most. But I've also learned that dignity is more valuable than money, that truth is more important than peace, and that it is never, ever too late to stand up for what is right. If I could talk to anyone who is listening to this, anyone going through something similar, this is what I would tell you. Protect what is yours, not out of greed, but out of respect for your work, for your sacrifice. Hire a good lawyer, one who has no ties to your family. Write a clear will. Establish legal structures that protect your interests. But above all, don't be afraid to make difficult decisions, even if those decisions mean distancing yourself from people you love, even if they mean being alone, even if they mean pain. Because at the end of the day, when you look in the mirror, the only person whose respect you truly need is your own. And believe me, when you make the right decision, when you defend your dignity, when you refuse to be treated as less than you are, that self-respect is worth more than any relationship, any money, anything. Dignity has no age. Wisdom has no expiration date, and the courage to get up when you are knocked down, that is eternal. I miss my son every day. What happened hurts with every breath. Do I regret what I did? Not for a second, because I did the right thing. And sometimes doing the right thing is the hardest thing you can do, but it's what allows you to live with yourself. It's what allows you to sleep at night. It's what allows you to look in the mirror and see a man of principle, not a victim. This company still stands stronger than ever. And I'm still here at 73 years old, still working, still fighting, still living with dignity. And if that isn't victory, I don't know what is. My name is Elijah Hawthorne. I am 73 years old. I live in this beautiful city that has given me so much. And this was my story, a story of betrayal, yes, but also of justice, of dignity, of learning that sometimes losing someone is not losing but becoming free. A big hug from my heart to yours. Until next time. And remember, dignity has no age. Elijah Hawthorne, 73 years old businessman, betrayed father, but never defeated.